Om Shri Matre Namaha. Om Ganganapate Namaha. A person gets failure due to various reasons. The prime reason is called fear. If he who is weak in mind, before his trial attempt, he comes to a conclusion that he will get failure. Why? Because the fear dominates him in all the ways. That's why fear takes an important role to decide the person's failure in one's life. It should be eradicated. Why? Because the fear has so many ways. One is pain is only temporary. The long game versus the short game should be known. One should understand the tools of fear, the causes of fear. When you understand the causes of fear, you can remove it and get success. Failures teach lessons, but regret causes pain. Therefore, one should not degrade oneself thinking of one's failure in one's life. The fear of failure makes a person utterly weak, not only physical, even mind. Therefore, the sound body, sound mind makes a person strong. Basing on these things, I want to bring to you. Therefore, I took fear, regret more than failure. The topic is this. Start with prayer. Shri Venkatachaladhisham Shriyadhyasita Vakshasam Shritachetannamandaram Srinivasamaham Bhaje. High achievers may appear bold, but they are not necessarily courageous. While they love success and recognition, they have little experience with failure. What looks like bold moves to others are in truth calculated steps to avoid making mistakes to achievers. This fear of falling off the ladder creates a psychological barrier where they may talk themselves out of taking risks and use their intelligence to rationalize their limiting choices. The truth is that the barriers you create for yourself are the obstacles you have the most control over. Rarely is a decision or risk an all or nothing venture. More likely, the move you are contemplating is just a step that can be adjusted or fixed, or it is the step that leads to the next, probably better step in your career or project. Risk avoidance behavior affects more than career choices. If you are a leader, you are promoting mediocrity when you don't support making mistakes in the pursuit of innovation and improvement. You silence ideas. You kill imagination. You restrain passion as you force people into a narrow band of behavior. Fear that you will be sorry for not making the choice your gut said was the right thing to do, for not jumping on the opportunity, or for letting someone else take the position that should have been yours. Fear these regrets before you make them real. To increase your courage and comfort with risk, trust yourself more. That is the first step to understand the essence of this. Identify your talents and recount your lists of achievements to date. Then, when faced with an opportunity that could be risky, review your list. Give yourself the evidence you need to prove to yourself. You will succeed even if mistakes are made. Identify your resources. Determine how can access the resources you will need to uh, falconate your success. Can you find a coach or mentor to help you walk through new problems and decisions you may face? Can you research best practices or case studies that will provide you with fresh ideas? With the internet, real time learning is eminently accessible. Choose to misbehave. Most thought leaders are not well behaved men and women. If you are courageous enough to speak up and move forward without knowing if you will succeed, you have the chance to experience the extreme joy of success. And yes, you might experience disappointment, embarrassment, and frustration if you stumble, but you can bounce back with the wisdom and perspective that will take you further in your career. Commit to bringing your whole self to work, which includes experiencing all your emotions in pursuit of ultimate success. Develop an optimistic viewpoint. Don't focus on the worst that can happen. Stay focused on what is possible. Rizwani quotes makes you CEO of Chesapeake Bay Candle. Optimism isn't about blind faith. It's about overcoming obstacles. It's instead of asking, how can I be successful? Ask, how can I move mountains so I can see beyond what is known now? This is how you both increase your tolerance for risk and cultivate a competitive advantage. The difference between failure and regret is subtle but can be made. The difference from having a mediocre life to a life filled with great success. One of the greatest fears in our society is the fear of failure. The next would be fear of missing out, which is closely related to regret. However, the truth is that you had to choose not to do anything. Failure tends to be one of the greatest fears people will have in life. The next fear would be public speaking, and third would be death. Though the fear of death is more severe than failing, it is not as frequent of a thought as failing. In reality, most of us will be born once and die once, according to the scientific definition. Is it? However, we are afraid to live because we live in fear to live because of the unknown. What this causes is a failure of action and inevitable regret in the future. There is a saying, We miss every shot we don't take. That is also true in the minutes we spend on waste. When we choose to live life in the future, we miss what is happening in the present. We need to have a dream or vision of our future. But inaction will not get us closer to our goals. The one thing about dreaming is we can leave out any failure, difficulty, or uncertainty from the equation. We can live life in this dream world void of failure and regret, but it will not produce anything more than a mental note of what could be reality. What that means is if people continue to be fearful of failing, then the number of regrets people have potentially increase. When we look at failure versus regret, we will notice that failure leaves from or failure leaves room for change. If change can still happen, then a failure does not have to remain a failure for long. A failure can be one of the greatest lessons someone can learn in life. However, it is not a valid excuse for them to give up and quit. Since that is the case, a failure should not cause you to give up and from regrets. But that is a trend today. Knowing that this is a common trend, we must find ways to combat the norm of society and instead take the higher road. That higher road has its challenges, but it will lead to the best views you will have in your life. That's why we must learn to avoid unnecessary regrets, especially those formed from a failure that could have been a success. Regret is refined as feeling sad, repentant, or disappointed over. From the definition alone, we can see there are two significant parts. The first is dealing with regret for things that have happened. For example, you may regret yelling at your child over the spilled milk at the dinner table. Yes, you may be stressed, and even though you told them countless times to be careful, the accident still occurred. Now, you acting out in anger will not only make you feel worse, but it will damage the trust between you and your child. That is regret that people have after an emotional outburst. A failure in this sense would not cause any emotional harm but would teach a lesson to all parties involved. The second one. The second part of regret is missed opportunities. This can be a simple regret for not leaving earlier to head to work or not visiting your mother in the nursing home and getting the news that she has passed away. In most cases, regrettably missed opportunities can be avoided. However, our habits and lifestyle will make it concerning unless we can regain focus on what matters to us. In this form of guilt, We think time is in our side. We believe we have time to do what we want or need to do and still find the time for everything we ought to do. Well, the things we ought to do typically fall to the wayside and we blame our schedule or circumstances for not having enough time or resources to do it. The question now is to figure out how to live life with regrets you can deal with. The most significant difference between failure versus regret is that one offers you a second chance. Failure means you can try again. Regret opens an opportunity to do better, but the damage is already done. Regret is similar to broken trust. If you break trust, the other person has a scar from the betrayal. The scar will be there a long while before it is healed and forgotten. On the other hand, a failure is more like a bruise or scrap that will heal up in a few days. Regret is much more substantial, but we are more afraid of failure than we are of regret. If this is the case, then we have our fear priorities in the wrong order. The reason regret comes after fear is that people think that they have time. Both failures and regret are time based. A society, we have start dates and end dates for what you should have accomplished. That's why 65 is the age of retirement. The government would not dare have its workforce to stop working at the age of 30 to enjoy life. That was one of the big factors in the worker shortage during the pandemic. People were getting paid more to stay at home than to go to work. These people were by no means wrong, they were playing and using the system. Now that we are back to normal, they might have regrets that they wasted so much time in the house on unproductive tasks. They did not fail, but time keeps on moving regardless. The fear of failure stands in the present, but our gaze is toward the future. As a result, our minds fuel worst case scenarios that could play out if we commit to action. We fear the consequences of crossing bridges, but we don't even know if those bridges exist. This was the most common regret to all. When people realize that their life is almost overland, look back clearly, it is easy to see how many dreams have gone unfulfilled. Most people had not honored even half of their dreams and had to die knowing that it was due to the choices they had made or not made. Health brings a freedom very few realize until they no longer have it. This came from every male patient that I nursed. They missed their children's youth and their partner's companionship. Women also spoke to this regret, but as their uh, most regret from older generation. Many of the female patients had not been breadwinners. All men earners deeply regretted spending so much time of their lives on the treadmill of a work existence. Many people suppressed their feelings to keep pace or to keep peace with others. As a result, they settled for a mediocre existence and never became who they were truly capable of becoming. Many developed illness relating to the bitterness and resentment they carried as a result. This is a surprisingly common one. Many did not realize until the end that happiness is a choice. They had stayed stuck in old patterns and habits. The so called comfort of familiarity overflowed into their emotions as well as their physical lives. Fear of change had them pretending to others and themselves that they were content when deep within they longed to laugh properly and have silliness in their life again. There are several ways of interpreting this book. One way is to see it as a depressing and sad. Another way is to see it as a wake up call to take sobering look at where we are in life. Another is to see what lessons to take on board and activity apply to our own lives. The emotion of fear. There is nothing wrong with fear. On the contrary, it is an emotion that heightens our senses and sharpens our attention. Fear only becomes problematic when we fail to address what is frightening them. The fear of failure. The new technology of success, she describes how failure affects people who don't believe they can earn from their mistakes. This kind of fixed mindset could lead to a single failure appearing worse than it is. Individuals with this mind see themselves as finished products rather than work in progress. However, people with growth mindsets perceive such a setback as opportunities to advance and develop. If we are afraid to try, the only way to overcome that fear is to take action. Fear grows within our minds and becomes a regret if we don't act. People living with the fear of failure tend to be dealing with more profound anxiety, which is the fear of experiencing a diminished sense of self worth. This feeling can linger for a lifetime and can flare up in times when we face uncertainty or the unknown. Yet, while failure can be detrimental to some, it can also motivate others. Many of the world's most admired people experience failures before accomplishing incredible fears or incredible feats. The fear of regret. Regret is harder on the mind than failure. Failure is temporary, regret is forever. Dictionaries define regret as a feeling sad, repentant, or disappointed over something that has happened or been done, especially a loss or missed opportunity. The regret I want to focus on is the sense of loss and missed opportunity. The most significant difference between failure and regret is that one offers you a second chance, Failure means you can try again. In addition, the pain that arises from a failure is only temporary and fades with time. Regret is much more substantial, and the pain it causes us can plague us until the end of our days. The puzzling aspects of this is that we tend to be more afraid of failure than we are of regret. If this is the case, we have our fear priorities in the wrong order. The reason regret comes after fear is that we think we have time. Failures teach lessons, regret causes pain. How? Let us analyze. Regret is worse than failure because we can't do anything about what we regret. Indeed, we might get new opportunities to make different choices, but the past is still the past. It is gone forever. On the other hand, failure always has the potential for different outcomes. We can choose to learn or dwell, but in the end, we still know something that we didn't before. The tools. Whenever we stretch ourselves in a new direction, whether it is learning a new skill or making decisions to move forward into an uncertain future, mistakes, miscalculations, and mishaps will happen to some degree. We know this from a rational perspective, but that is not where the challenge lies. It's an emotional acceptance that usually trips us up. Even if we recognize mistakes can happen, it is all too easy for us to succumb to our inner critic and avoid disappointment. We tend to bend the knee to the fear of failure and avoid committing to action. If we want to change how we think about success and failure, we must reverse negative thought patterns. I use the skill of active awareness in conjunction with the tools presented below to make the right choice. The most effective method to transform fear into regret is to befriend my future self. I know that my future self will be powerless to affect my current reality. It is only my present self that can affect the change of this moment. Pain is only temporary. I frame the pain of my current situation from a future perspective which reads any struggle and discomfort as a temporary. If I only fixate on the perspective of my present self, it can feel like the distress and strain might be too much to bear in the moment. The anxious mind tends to exaggerate problems and pain and categorize it as a chronic instead of what it is, acute and short lived. The long game versus the short game. Focusing more on the short game and less on the long game and less on the long game helps me engage with my current situation. The long game focuses my attention on where I need or want to end up. The short game is about keeping my attention on the actions I need to take in the here and now. The long game perspective is essential to ensure I have the correct orientation and am heading in the right direction. But keeping my attention here too long can harm my motivation. I can get overwhelmed by everything out of my control and influence. I can fall into the vicious cycle of ruminating thoughts whereby I fixate on all the things that are still up in the air and get caught up in the anxiety of all the things that could go wrong. Perceived failures are signs that we need to learn more about ourselves. But in the end, failing at something could be the best thing that ever happens to us. Fear extinguishes far more dreams than failure does. Using our brain's innate abilities makes it possible to break through a never ending cycle of negativity and learn to embrace, to defeat rather than run from it. श्रीकांताय कल्याण निधे निधेन्द्रां श्री वेंकटनिवासाय श्रीनिवासाय मंगलम मंगलाशास्त्रपरे पदाचार्य पुरोगमैः सर्वैष पूर्वैराचार्यैः सत्कृताख्यास्तु मंगलम्.